In this video, I'm going to show you how to take professional looking product photographs on a tight budget.
Whether you want to make cash from your camera or simply sell a few items on eBay, product photography is a great skill to learn. In this tutorial, we'll look at how to light and shoot a perfume bottle. The most challenging thing about this is the lighting, so we'll take it one step at a time and build the lighting up over several frames. Then blend those frames in Photoshop to bring together the most attractively lit areas of each. Because of this, we can get away with using just 2 lights and a few other inexpensive bits of kit, which we'll look at in a moment. But first, we need to get set up.
So what I've got here is a reflective black surface that will give me a nice reflection on the underside of the product. And you could use black perspex for this. That's often what photographers will use. If you don't have that lying around, you could actually just use an old picture frame, which is what I've got here. It's just a piece of glass with a piece of black card underneath it, and that gives me a similar effect to black perspex. So before we start shooting, we really need to get these products as clean as possible. So I'm going to put these white gloves on and give them a quick wipe just to get rid of any dust or hairs or anything like that. And we're not going to get rid of everything. We might need to just get rid of a few little spots in post, but if we get it as good as we can in camera, then it makes our life a lot easier afterwards. So now with our product in place, I'm just going to spend a bit of time working on the composition and the focusing to make sure that's all perfect, because once the camera and product is set up, we're not going to touch either again. We're going to keep them still throughout, so it's important to get this right at this stage. So I'm just going to frame up my product here, focus, make sure the labels are nice and sharp. That's all looking good. You might want to tweak the camera height here because we want to be looking slightly upwards on the product here, because that gives it kind of the aspirational viewpoint. If we're looking up on it, it kind of makes it look kind of dominant and important. So when you're framing up your products, it's always a good idea to kind of start off from a low angle and angle upwards slightly at them. As for camera settings, we're in manual mode here on the 5D Mark III, and standard studio settings really. We've got manual mode, 1/200th of a second, ISO at 100. The only figure that we need to really be concerned about here is the F number. We're at F13 here, and hopefully that will give us enough depth of field to get front to back sharpness across our subject. So as for lighting, I've got a couple of studio flash heads here. So these are just the kind of heads that you would find in a home studio lighting kit. I've got one that I'm going to shine on the background and another with a softbox that I'm going to use to light the subject. If you didn't have a home studio lighting kit like this, then you could get away with a couple of speed lights. You know, you can have a speed light with a softbox attachment. That would work really well. A kit like this doesn't really cost all that much, and it's a worthwhile investment if you're shooting a lot of products. Okay, so now let's talk a bit about the lighting here. So we've got a 2 light setup, as I say. This light here is going to give us a nice hot spot on the background that's going to gradually fall off into darkness. So it's going to give us kind of a nice spotlight effect. Now, we've just got a reflector on the front here, and just to tighten the beam, we've also got a honeycomb grid, which just fits on the front of the reflector like that. And if we turn the modeling light on, you'll be able to see how it gives us just a nice kind of soft spot on the background here. We might need to just tweak the power of the light and also the positioning just until we get it exactly where we want it to be. So I'm just going to fire off a quick test shot here. And let's have a look. So here's the first shot, and the background light, you can see it's given us that nice gentle fall off from a hotspot down at the bottom here, but it's slightly too far over to the left, and also it's probably slightly too dark. So I'll just try shifting it over to the right slightly and turning up the power a notch. So we've adjusted the power, we've shifted the position, and now it's giving us a nice centralized hotspot there with the fall off. Now this light here is going to give us our illumination across the subject here. We position it slightly behind here to the left side of the product. That way it's going to give us a nice highlight along the edge of the product here. And then we're going to use a reflector to bounce some light back in and a diffuser panel to give us some nice kind of soft illumination across the subject. So we're going to position this about here. Let's try a shot like this. So this is the shot, and you can see we've got the lovely highlight along the edge here. We're getting some illumination across the bottle. We're starting to pick up some detail with this backlit part of the transparent bottle here. And if we switch between, that was our first shot with just the background light, and that's the shot with that edge light coming in. You can see we're starting to build up our lighting here. Now take a look at what happens when we add in a diffusion panel. Now this is just a cheap diffusion panel you can get from a 5-in-1 reflector, and if I hold it up to the side of the subject here, what I'm going to get is some light bouncing through the diffusion, which is going to give me some nice wraparound across the subject. So now you can see we're really starting to get some nice illumination across the box here, and also it's kind of coming into the bottle itself a little bit. But let's try another shot now to really see if we can pick up some of the detail on the bottle itself. So now I'm going to use a bit of white card here just to bounce some light back into the shadows from the other side. So light's coming from my main light there, hitting the card here and then bouncing back across the subject. So I'm just going to bring it in as tight as I can just to see if I can get some nice illumination across the bottle there. So now you can see we're getting some really nice detail across the top part of the perfume bottle here. Got this lovely edge highlight here. We've got a nice illumination on the metal part of the bottle here, and we're getting some detail in the label too. We can comp this in with our other shots later on. So I think we've nearly got all the pieces that we need for this, but I'd really like to boost the liquid itself inside the bottle. So what I'm going to do is position a piece of white paper behind it so that the bottle obscures the paper, and hopefully this will bounce some light back through the liquid towards the camera. We just need to position it so that the bottle completely obscures the paper. So here you can see our liquid is nicely backlit. There's a bit of paper poking out of the top here, but I could spend 5 minutes trying to get rid of that in camera, or a couple of seconds trying to do it in Photoshop. So I'll just do that in post, I think. Similarly, you can see we've got this really nice reflection along the edge of the box here, and if I flick between the shot before and that shot, you can see the difference that edge makes. But again, it's slightly messy at the top here. I could spend a while trying to fix that, but again, I'd just rather do it in Photoshop, I think. And so if we just go back to that one and forward, you can see the difference in the liquid there. Now with all the shots that we need, we're ready to go to the computer and piece it all together.
So here are my 3 pictures that I'm going to blend together. You can see in this one here, this is where I held that circular diffuser panel to the left side. In the next one, this is where I held that white card to the right side to bounce light back in to the bottle here. And in the third one here, this is where we placed that piece of white paper behind the bottle here to give it that nice glow. So let's combine these 3 images together now. So I'm going to highlight them all here in Lightroom, and I can right click over them and choose Edit In, and I can go down here and choose Open as Layers in Photoshop. And once they're open here in Photoshop, if we bring up our Layers panel here by going to Window Layers, you can see each image now sits on a separate layer here within our stack. Now, if you're not doing this via Lightroom, you can always just go to File, Scripts, and Load Files into Stack, and you can load a set of images in a similar way. Now let's start blending our photos here. So I'm going to turn off that top layer for now by clicking the eye icon, and I'll highlight this middle layer, and I'll try and blend this one and the one below. So I'm going to look at the areas that I want to include on this layer here. So if I toggle it off and on, I can see I quite like this top section of the perfume bottle here, and I also quite like the illumination on the logo here. So I'm going to isolate those areas and hide everything else. So let's zoom in a little bit closer. Then what I can do is hold Alt and click the Add Layer Mask icon here in the Layers panel to add a full black mask that completely hides everything on that layer. Now while the mask thumbnail there is active, I can paint with white to reveal just the areas that I want. So I can grab the brush tool, set white as my foreground color, and then I can start painting. So I can click once, hold Shift and click again to paint in a straight line with the brush tool here. So I can quickly paint around the edges of the object here, and then I can fill in the area in the middle. If you prefer, you could make a selection of the area and then fill in the selection to kind of build up your mask that way, or you can just simply paint with the brush tool like this. So it depends on whichever method you think is more accurate for your particular object. So I'll just finish off around here, and that's that area complete. Now, as I say, we could use a selection, so I'm going to try selecting the label. I can do that using the quick selection tool, and I can just quickly paint over the label there with the quick selection tool to select it, and then I can fill the area with white. Now with white as my foreground color here, I can use the keyboard shortcut Alt and Backspace, which fills the selection with my foreground color, revealing that part of the label there. Then I can hit Command or Control and D to deselect. So now if I toggle that layer off and on, you can see we've isolated those areas and we've blended those two layers to get the best bits of each. Now let's turn on the top layer, and we need to do the same with this, but I can see actually there's a slight misalignment going on. I must have nudged either the tripod or the stand that holds the product. So I might just need to nudge the layer into position. I can do that using the Move tool, and I could perhaps just lower the opacity of that layer and then just use the Move tool to nudge it down so it kind of closely matches the other layer like that. And I think that's much better. So I'll drag the opacity back to 100, and then as before, I can just toggle the layer off and on to see which areas I want, and I want to include this side of the box here, and also I quite like this highlight along this side of the bottle here. So again, I'll hold Alt and click the Add Layer Mask icon, then I can grab the brush tool and start painting with white once more around this area here. So again, I can hold Shift and click between 2 points to make a straight line between them, and just continue painting over this portion of the box. And obviously I'm doing this fairly quickly. You might want to be a bit more precise with your images. Once that's done, we can continue adding in that highlight along this edge here just by shift clicking between 2 points once more. And I'm pretty happy with that. I might just hit X to flip my foreground color to black, which allows me to hide portions on the layer. And then I can just, again, shift click between different points just to make sure I've got a nice straight edge along here like this. And that's better. So now I've got my three images blended together nicely. I'll just show you how this is working. So this is my bottom layer. Then I've added in these little sections from this layer, and I've added in the slightly lighter box here, and also this highlight from that top layer. Now I also quite like the side here of the bottle from that top layer as well. So I'm going to highlight that mask thumbnail again, grab the brush tool and paint with white over this section here to reveal a slightly nicer section of the bottle there. So this is all just about piecing it together, choosing the bits that you like, and then just fine-tuning the layer masks until everything comes together in the way that you want. Next, we're going to want to retouch any messy little spots or bits of dust. So we can make a new layer for this at the top of our layer stack, and let's just rename it. We'll call it Healing. And then I can grab the Spot Healing brush tool here from the Tools panel, and I want to make sure Sample All Layers is checked here in the tool options at the top of the screen, and then I can just zoom in closer to areas, and I can paint to remove details that I don't want. So I find this plastic tube here in the bottle a bit distracting, so I'm just going to paint to remove that. So you're going to want to go around the image here and just make sure that it's as perfect as possible. I'm not going to do that right now, but just to give you an idea of how the tool works, we'll just finish off down here, perhaps get rid of this little top section of the same thing here. So once our retouching is complete, we might want to clone out some details. So I can make another new layer. We'll call this layer cloning. And then I can grab the clone tool from the tools panel over here, or you can hit S for that. And again, we want to set it to sample all layers, and then we can hold Alt and click to sample a source, and then paint to remove any areas that we want to clone out. So I'm just cloning over the little bit of paper at the top here. Again, I can hold Shift and click between 2 points to clone in a straight line like that. And I'm also just going to make the top of the box here just a little bit neater. So I'm just going to clone upwards to the corner point there, and then across like this. And of course, if we like, we can clone to kind of stretch out the edges here of the base. But in fact, I think I'll just crop in just to make it life easier on myself. So I'm going to just right click and clear the ratio here with my crop tool, and I can just drag out these side points here to get the crop that I want. Perhaps just crop in a little on the top there. And then we can make a few final tonal tweaks using the Camera Raw filter. So I can use a keyboard shortcut for this. So I can hit Command or Control, that's Command on the Mac, Control on the PC, plus Shift, Alt and E to merge a copy of all of the layers into a single layer at the top of my stack there. And then I can bring that layer into the Camera Raw filter, which is what I like to use for these kind of final toning tweaks. So I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and let's perhaps just increase the vibrance and the saturation a touch. We could tweak the temperature here, perhaps add a touch of contrast, maybe a touch of clarity like this. Let's tweak the shadows and the highlights like this, the whites and the blacks. Make sure I've got a nice full range of tones here by holding Alt and dragging the whites and blacks. I also could get stuck in with a few selective adjustments. So for example, I could grab the adjustment brush, dial in some negative exposure over here, and then just paint to darken down areas like the edges of the base plate here, and perhaps this corner up here as well. And we can just continue tweaking. We could perhaps go to the tone curve here, plot an S-shaped curve like this to add a bit more punch and contrast. And I'm happy with that, so I'll hit OK. And that's my finished image. So there we have it. That's how to shoot and piece together a set of product photos for professional results.